Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about how the 2020 election will unfold and the possibility of a disputed election. The American election is just days away. Tensions are high and the temperature is rising in the run-up to the vote. Both sides have framed the other side winning as an existential threat to the nation, and both sides appear poised to contest the results should the outcome be in doubt. What issues could swing the election in the run-up to the vote? With a plurality of votes being cast by mail, could there be a disputed election? And what will the geopolitical impact be of such a disputed election? All that in this video. Run-up to the election. Now, on the surface, going into the election, the fundamentals don't look that good for President Trump. The economy is down, the pandemic rages, and there is social unrest on the streets. Yet as we know, in 2016, predictions that Hillary Clinton had a 95% chance of winning were shattered on election night when Trump scored an upset victory. Although the chances are smaller this year, the same could still happen this November. On the one hand, Joe Biden leads in every single swing state, and Trump's approval rating on key issues is down, with just 42% approving of his coronavirus response, and only 18% believing that the violence at the protests will decrease if Trump is re-elected, compared to 43% if Biden is elected. However, on the other hand, Trump still commands a 51% approval rating on his handling of the economy, a key issue for his re-election. On top of that, Joe Biden's lead is fundamentally vulnerable. 56% of Biden voters only support him because he's not Trump. The lack of a strong motivating message for the Democrats is a fundamental weakness. It may be enough to coast off of anti-Trump sentiment, but the Democrats really aren't doing themselves any favors. Add to this the fact that Biden has no ground campaign in the swing state of Michigan, choosing to focus only on digital campaigning, a mistake Hillary Clinton made in 2016, and you've got the recipe for a very weak opposition campaign. Wildcards. But besides the fundamental issues of the pandemic, the economy, and the protests, there are three wildcards in the run-up to the election. First is the open seat on the Supreme Court. Trump has nominated a strong conservative to the Supreme Court, which could mobilize his own base, but also that of the Democrats. However, the issue of the Supreme Court is more existential for Democrats than Republicans. If Trump's Supreme Court nominee doesn't go through, the court will still be 5-4 conservative. But if Trump is successful, the court will have a 6-3 conservative supermajority, relegating liberals to decades of irrelevance on the Supreme Court. So it's unsurprising that following the death of liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Democrats raised $250 million in 1 week compared to just $400 million in 1 month in August. On top of that, the share of Democrats who considered the Supreme Court very important in deciding their vote increased from 48% to 60%, compared to an increase from 50% to 54% for Republicans. In other words, the issue is more motivating for Democrats. Second is President Trump testing positive for coronavirus. While some speculated that a sickly president might generate sympathy, the numbers tell a different story. 65% of voters think that Trump would not have been infected with coronavirus if he took the pandemic seriously. His infection has highlighted his perceived failure on the coronavirus issue and brought the pandemic to the forefront. This is an issue where he struggles with voters, rather than an issue like the economy where he does well with voters, and his standing in the polls has suffered as a result. Third is the credibility of the election. On the one hand, Trump has claimed that mail-in ballots open up the possibility for voter fraud, declaring that the election will be rigged using mail-in ballots. Now, states like Oregon have used 100% mail-in ballots since 1998, and in 22 years, there have been just 14 cases of fraud out of 1.5 million ballots cast. However, it is true that states only implementing the policy this year have faced significant logistical challenges. In the swing state of Ohio, 50,000 voters were mailed the wrong ballots. Although this was corrected, it only reinforces the fear of a rigged election. On the other side, Democrats have pointed to multiple voter suppression tactics used by Republicans. One such tactic is shutting down polling stations. For instance, in Kentucky, 95% of polling stations were closed, disproportionately in urban areas that lean Democrat. That left the city of Louisville, which has over 600,000 registered voters, with just one polling station, leaving countless people banging on the doors because they didn't have a chance to vote. While in Georgia, over 200,000 people have been wrongfully purged from the voters' roll, disproportionately in Democratic-leaning areas. And of course, there are the measures taken by the Postmaster General to undermine mail-in voting. What this means is that even though Biden leads, a few 100,000 votes can make a difference in key swing states. On top of that, Biden could win the election by over 5 million votes, but still lose the Electoral College. With Trump on the one hand calling into question the legitimacy of mail-in ballots, and Democrats on the other hand pointing to voter suppression, both sides have been primed not to accept the results of the election. And that brings us to a volatile situation on election day. A red mirage. Now, previously we discussed the red mirage election scenario, and it goes as follows. Democrats are twice as likely as Republicans to vote by mail, with 67% of those planning to vote by mail being Democrats. Mail-in ballots take much longer to count. Importantly, the swing states of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin do not allow counting of mail-in ballots to begin until Election Day, delaying the vote count for several days. So on Election Day, as all the in-person ballots are counted, just like a mirage, it will seem like Donald Trump is winning in an overwhelming electoral victory, and Trump will declare himself the winner before all mail-in ballots have been counted. But then, as the days go by and the mail-in ballots, which are disproportionately Democrat, are counted, the mirage disappears and the election begins to swing in favor of Joe Biden. But at this stage, Trump and his supporters have already declared victory. For weeks preceding the election, President Trump has called into question the credibility of mail-in ballots. At the same time, Hillary Clinton has insisted that Joe Biden should not concede the election under any circumstances. Put this all together, and suddenly you have an election in dispute.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States.
Just like in 2000, both the Trump and Biden campaigns will challenge the election results in court. But unlike in 2000, this will occur against the backdrop of massive polarization and social unrest. People will take to the streets insisting that their candidate won. And because politicians on both sides have an incentive to keep their supporters mobilized and not back down to try to calm things down, the situation can only escalate. Add to this dangerous cocktail armed extremist groups. In the state of Michigan, a domestic terrorist plot to kidnap Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer was foiled. In the chaos that would unfold in a disputed election scenario, such actions by extremist groups are all the more likely. And so the inevitable result of such a scenario will be riots and massive social unrest. A disputed election. If the results are contested, the battle will play out in court. This is where the Supreme Court nomination comes into play. Back in 2000, a conservative-leaning Supreme Court voted against allowing a recount, which definitively decided the election in favor of Bush. This time around, a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, especially if Trump's Supreme Court nominee is confirmed before the election, could decide the election in favor of Trump. However, there is nuance to this issue. Supreme Court justices being appointed by a conservative president and having a conservative judicial ideology does not necessarily mean that they will rule in favor of Trump. The courts are, after all, still independent. And several conservative judges have ruled in favor of liberal issues like gay rights. But whichever way the court battle goes, and however the social unrest plays out, the impact on the markets and America's geopolitical position can only be negative. With all the chaos and uncertainty that could surround a disputed election, this opens up the opportunity for geopolitical rivals like China. An open goal for China. The elections take place at a time of an extremely turbulent internal situation. However, on November 3rd, Americans will also decide who will face what may be the greatest geopolitical call in US history: the question of stopping China. And the next half of the decade may be pivotal to this issue. Throughout his tenure, Donald Trump rightly viewed Chinese growth as a problem that could undermine US hegemony in the future. However, the effectiveness of counteracting this phenomenon remains questionable. The trade war declared on Beijing failed to change Washington's negative trade deficit. In addition, there is a decline in trust in the international forum after decisions such as the withdrawal from the WHO. Biden opposed departing from the WHO. However, his administration will retain the tariffs imposed by Trump and pursue a policy of reducing US dependence on China. Joe Biden is also one-headed against Chinese expansionism. However, some Chinese analysts have pointed out that a Democratic candidate would be a more convenient choice for the Chinese Communist Party, as the Trump administration is extremely unpredictable. Biden is likely someone with whom negotiations to de-escalate the tense situation in the South China Sea would be much more likely to succeed. Following this lead, Biden, as a more skilled diplomat, could also have a greater chance of consolidating the Western world towards the Chinese problem. Every stick has two ends. Whichever way this goes, a contested election would mean that whoever becomes president would have their legitimacy and mandate to rule put into question. This would have consequences for the authority of the president, not just at home, but also abroad. However, none of this may play out this way. A red Mirage disputed election scenario depends on the election being close. The swing state of Florida will have its results on election day. If Florida goes for Biden, there is no realistic path for a Trump victory, even if he still wins all of the Rust Belt states that he won in 2016 a week later. Nevertheless, whatever happens in the next few weeks will determine the course of the United States for years to come. The part about China, as well as the editing for this video, was done by Hubert from Good Times Bad Times.
Hello, my name is Hubert and I'm running the Good Times Bad Times channel. If you like this material, there is a strong chance you may also like the rest of the content of my channel. Feel free to visit. The links will be provided below.
Today is my birthday. No, seriously, it is. So consider making a donation on Patreon or on PayPal and gain access to exclusive benefits and help the channel grow further. Thank you to my Patreons for making this video possible. Like, share, and subscribe, because this was my take.